From the headquarters of Talasio English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soini Gray. Today marks the end of the 10-day deadline given by Ecuador's President Lenin Moreno to his ministers to find Guacho, the leader of the armed group apparently responsible for violence and kidnappings on the border with Colombia. Moreno also gave Guacho a deadline to surrender himself. His Olivier Sinistera group is believed to be still holding an Ecuadorian couple as hostages. It was earlier accused of kidnapping and murdering 3 journalists and carrying out a number of bomb attacks in the Esmeraldas province in the north of Ecuador, which killed 4 members of the armed forces. On Wednesday, the Ecuadorian Interior Minister Cesar Navas signed an agreement with the U.S. Ambassador Todd Chapman to fight organized transnational crime. This will allow U.S. drug, immigration, and customs enforcement agencies to work in Ecuador. The agreement also aims to fight money laundering, human trafficking, and weapons smuggling. The U.S. ambassador said this was the right time to develop military and security projects in the country because ideological differences had been overcome.
We all have to join in the fight against transnational crime linked to narco-traffic. Ecuador is not a country that produces drugs or cultivates coca leaves. We don't have drug labs, but the country is used for transit. We know most of the drugs leaving Colombia come through our country and go to Central and North America. It goes to the United States and other countries in the region. To fight this, we all have to remain united.
The United States and my colleagues at the Security Department and the DEA are here to cooperate with the Ecuadorian government in its efforts to fight against transnational crime. We want to support Ecuador to reach that ideal of a region of peace, security, and prosperity.
The heads of central banks of several Latin American countries will meet in Quito, Ecuador for the first time on Friday to analyze regional cooperation in finance. Representatives from 10 countries, including Venezuela and Bolivia, will meet to discuss 2 main topics: financial technology and cybersecurity. The meeting will be held behind closed doors. A public prosecutor in Peru has accused the former President Alberto Fujimori and 3 former ministers of carrying out forced sterilizations during his administration. Prosecutor Luis Landa said Fujimori should be prosecuted as he was aware of the practice and allowed it to continue. Women have been demanding justice for the victims of forced sterilization, including at a protest in 2015 when demonstrators were tear gassed by the police. According to official data, over 270,000 tubal ligament surgeries and 22,000 vasectomies were performed in Peru between 1996 and 2001. They were almost entirely performed on poor Quechua-speaking rural people. It is impossible to know exactly how many were carried out under coercion. And our correspondent in Lima, Jaime Herrera, brings us all the details on this case.
Prosecutor Luis Landa has ordered a provincial judge to investigate Peruvian former President Alberto Fujimori, who ruled the country from 1992 to 2000, and 3 of his former health ministers. They are accused of overseeing the forced sterilization of over 2,000 women. Indigenous campesinos from rural areas in different regions of Peru. At least 3 of the women have already died, including Mabelita Maestranza, who died as a consequence of the sterilization process. We should recall that some years ago, this case was put on hold. However, human rights organizations, as well as victims, lodged a complaint against prosecutor Marcelita Maestranza, who made that decision. Now, she is forced to reopen the case against Fujimori, his ministers, as well as all the people involved in the practice. This legal fight has been going on for 15 years. There are 2,600 recorded victims. But, as human rights organizations say, the number could be much higher, even 3 times the official figure, given the fact that many women were not able to report what happened to them due to the lack of access to justice.
We thank Jaime Herrera for that report, and we have some breaking news just coming in. Barbados' Prime Minister Frondell Stewart has announced the election date. It's May 24th. Stewart had until June 4th to call the election day. Nomination day for candidates is set for Monday, May 7th. So this brings to an end months of uncertainty in Barbados. Now, earlier we had spoken to Peter Wickham of the Caribbean Development Research Services, CADRES. He said that the Barbadian Prime Minister's decision to let Parliament dissolve without setting an election date was a regional first, and it could be politically harmful. Let's listen to that soundbite now.
Generally, longer terms result in defeat. Prime Minister Stewart is now almost at the 63rd month of what should be a 60-year term. And generally speaking, it spells defeat. The polls are looking very bad for him. Strategically, it doesn't make sense, especially as Ms. Morley said, there's not anything that we can say that he's doing while he's there to make things better for him long term. So, I mean, we keep asking what is the strategy, and he keeps saying that he has the time legally, and really it's a question of his legal right, and it's not a question of political strategy. So I draw a blank where that one is concerned as far as the strategy. I think it's highly unwise politically, and I think he will pay dearly for it.
So the election date in Barbados is now May 24th. In Brazil, thousands of indigenous people are marching through the capital, Brasilia, to the National Congress. They say a law signed by the President Michel Temer last year will strike off the map most of the country's indigenous land, and they're demanding that the law be revoked. Mia Alberti reports from Brasilia.
Today we are seeing the big march of the Freeland camp here in Brasilia. 3,000 indigenous people have just marched 5 kilometers through the heart of the city, and their final destination is the National Congress, which is the building right behind me, and you can see now they're marching towards that building. And today they are protesting the government, they are protesting President Michel Temer. They say that the president and his administration haven't done enough for indigenous rights in Brazil, and in fact former President Lula da Silva signed 79 decrees demarking indigenous lands. Former President Dilma Rousseff signed 21, and President Michel Temer has signed 0 so far. So that's a cause for protest for these indigenous groups. Now they are not only protesting land rights, they are not only protesting against the violence that we've been talking about in the past few days, they're not protesting against only the killings that we've been talking about. They are protesting about the lack of access, about prejudice, about racism, and all aspects of the indigenous life here in Brazil. Just yesterday I talked with a mother, and she told me that she has been trying to enroll to university for years now, and she says that she hasn't been allowed to enroll because of her skin color and because she's indigenous. So this is a march going on right now. They're in their way towards the National Congress. Today is the big march of the Freeland camp. Last year they brought coffins with them, symbolizing the deaths of hundreds of indigenous people in the past few years. And today they have a big banner and several buses, and we will keep you updated at the Freeland camp here in Brasilia.
We thank Mia Alberti for that report, and we're going to take a short break, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. 4 days into Venezuela's election campaign, the National Electoral Council has responded to the allegations of irregularities from some opposition candidates.
The electoral campaign continues in Venezuela in a satisfactory manner, according to the National Electoral Council. Meanwhile, candidates continue with rallies across the country. Henry Falcón, candidate for the Avanzada Progresista Party, has complained to the CNE that rules on media airtime for each candidate are not being followed. He has asked for sanctions against Nicolás Maduro and has sent a message to the Democratic Unity Roundtable.
Once again, I have had to remind the Democratic Unity Roundtable that now is time for agreements, a time for meetings, a time for decisions that represent the whole country and not just one party.
Sandra Oblitas, vice president of the CNE, has pointed out that 314 prosecutors from all across the country will enforce the rules. She has responded to the criticism from some candidates, assuring them that the CNE have opened investigations into alleged violations.
About the electoral campaign, we want to remind everyone that it strictly belongs to the CNE. Therefore, every authority is subjected to the guidelines from the National Electoral Council.
On the other hand, the candidate from Esperanza por el Cambio party, Javier Bertucci, hasn't ruled out a joint candidacy against Nicolás Maduro. He says he is in talks with Henry Falcón.
We need to sit down and talk about a possible agreement on the elections. It's possible that we may join forces with Henry Falcón.
It is a possible alliance that Falcón himself has not ruled out.
The leader of the FARC political party in Colombia, Iván Márquez, says he will not take his seat in Congress until the peace agreement is fully respected. Márquez tweeted that the agreement signed with the government in Havana in 2016 must be respected without any cheating or betrayal. He added that the Congress is trying to bring in legislation that was not agreed to by both sides in the peace talks. FARC members have 10 reserved seats in the Congress. And the European Union Special Envoy for the Peace Process in Colombia, Eamon Gilmore, will visit the FARC leader Jesus Santrich in prison. Santrich is on a hunger strike after being arrested 2 weeks ago at the request of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. He is reported to be in very bad health. The visit was announced by the FARC's former presidential candidate.
We have the commitment of the Special Envoy from the European Union to visit our comrade Santrich in prison. Through him, I have sent him a message. We are very optimistic. We are positive this is the right way to work together with everyone who made the agreements possible. With the Colombian people who know the path that we have to take for Colombia is the one of peace. We are going to continue working for peace and avoiding those who want the agreements to fail.
Meanwhile, Jesus Santrich has been awarded more than $8,000 from a group of activists in Denmark. The money will go to Santrich's defense team, who is currently fighting an extradition order to the United States. The former guerrilla leader was arrested at the request of the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, after the U.S. accused him of drug trafficking. And Pablo Beltran, the chief negotiator for the National Liberation Army, has requested protection from the United States in order to continue the 5th round of peace talks. The request comes after Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno said his country will no longer host the talks or guarantee the process. This decision has forced the Colombian government and the ELN to find an alternative host. The ELN negotiating team fears the U.S. might request the extradition of ELN members. And Bolivian congressional leaders are denying that there's a dissolution of the Union of South American Nation, UNASUR.
Some media outlets and opposition members have released information saying that 6 members of the UNASUR bloc have withdrawn their participation, marking the end of the group.
In a mechanism of regional integration like UNASUR, there will always be ideological difference because there are governments with different ideologies.
According to the procedure, for a country to leave an organizational body, it must annul all procedures, as outlined here by President of the Senate.
The process before the Congress of the country notify UNASUR of their decision to leave the organization. 6 months have to pass for the country to leave the UNASUR. It's not like one comes to a restaurant and then leaves, or a bar. Some media outlets have even confused this and are trying to make people think that the UNASUR is a friends club where one leaves and comes when one pleases.
Some warned UNASUR of the discomfort of some countries over an alleged inactivity of the group. This is primarily because of the 2 years when Argentina was assigned the pro-temporary presidency of the organization.
The desperation of some for UNASUR to fail has made them see as if this is the end of UNASUR, not at all. I also want to remind you that in the last 2 years, UNASUR was in the hands of Argentina. It is important to know this because it seems that now after Bolivia has the pro-temporary presidency, all the countries turn their backs on Evo.
Argentina is one of the 6 countries that announced they will leave UNASUR. Accompanying them is Brazil, Peru, Paraguay, Colombia, and Chile. UNASUR was created in 2004. Freddy Morales, del Sur, Bolivia.
In Paraguay, the Supreme Court of Electoral Justice has decided against an election recount. The opposition candidate, Efrain Alegre, requested the recount, but the court has rejected his call and have declared the Colorado Party candidate, Mario Abdo Benitez, the winner. Opposition parties and social movements gathered in front of the Electoral Justice Building on Tuesday to denounce irregularities and demand transparency. Mexico's state prosecutor has said a local rapper has confessed to disposing of the bodies of the 3 film students who were kidnapped by dissolving them, the bodies, he means, in acid. And this is a report according to the BBC. Investigators have said the rapper told them this is not the first time he has disposed of bodies this way for the new generation Jalisco cartel. Now he's in custody and he will be charged with aggravated kidnappings. Initially, the police said the students were killed and doused with acid by members of the narco group. Now some argue the murders will be used to influence the outcome of Mexico's elections. And still in Mexico, as the electoral campaign goes ahead, a dirty war seems to be growing against the front-runner, the leftist candidate, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Adverts have appeared on Mexico City's buses comparing López Obrador to other Latin American leaders like Venezuela's Hugo Chavez and Brazil's Lula under the umbrella of alleged populism. López Obrador says his rivals are waging a fair campaign against him and they are misrepresenting his proposals on corruption, crime, and the economy.
Without losing our sanity, and by doing it respectfully, we are launching a counter-campaign against this dirty war, to remove the mask of those who are corrupt.
A dirty war is being waged against Andrés Manuel López Obrador. It's complete lies. Everything that they do and say. He's the most investigated man in the country. He's being investigated 3 or 4 times and they couldn't find anything on him.
Now, Nicaragua is waiting for the dialogue between the government and the private sector to begin, a day after the Catholic Church accepted its role to act as a mediator. Meanwhile, the situation in the streets has yet to go back to normal. On Wednesday, in the capital city of Managua, hundreds of people demanded the release of those arrested during the protests. Now, those clashes started last week during the demonstrations against President Daniel Ortega's social security reform and left several people dead. Bolivian President Evo Morales has asked for an effort to the South American governments to secure UNASUR. The message comes after 6 countries announced that they were planning to withdraw their participation in the regional integration body. Via Twitter, Morales called for responsibility to maintain unity as a continent beyond ideological differences. Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Paraguay and Peru announced last week they are suspending their UNASUR membership. We're going to take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and South Korean President Moon Jae-in are set to meet in a few hours' time for an ice-breaking summit. They will meet at the Peace House on the South Korean side of the border village of Panmunjom. It will be the first time a North Korean leader crosses into South Korean territory since the end of the Korean War in 1953. Both leaders are expected to talk about North Korea's nuclear and missile technology and inter-Korean relations. Kim is also scheduled to meet U.S. President Donald Trump sometime in May or June. French President Emmanuel Macron says he believes U.S. President Donald Trump will pull out of the Iran nuclear accord. There has been no official statement from Trump on this, but he needs to decide before May 12th whether the U.S. will continue suspending the economic sanctions on Iran that were lifted under the 2015 signed accord, or scrap the deal and restore sanctions. President Macron says he will work on a diplomatic framework to protect the Iran deal, which was signed between 6 nations.
I don't know what the U.S. decision will be, but if you take a rational look at the announcement so far, at the comments made by President Trump, it seems to me that he will not do his utmost to preserve the UN Comprehensive Plan of Action, commonly known as the Iranian nuclear deal.
As many as 13 employees from an opposition newspaper in Turkey have been sentenced to prison on terrorism charges. Here's more on that and some other big stories around the world.
A Turkish court has convicted 13 journalists and executives from the opposition Cumhuriyet Daily for helping 3 outlawed organizations. The court also accused them of aiding a failed coup in 2016. Their sentence ranged from 2.5 to 8 years in jail. According to P24 Press Group, there are 160 journalists behind the bar in the country, which is the highest number of jailed journalists in any country in the world.
They are telling people don't do journalism. If you do, we will arrest you and then we will send you to prison for up to 7.5 years. It's like the sword of Damocles. I want to tell colleagues, do not be scared. Keep on doing journalism. Let's keep on doing journalism together.
In another incident of violence against journalists, a 25-year-old Palestinian reporter and photographer succumbed to his injuries in Gaza City. Ahmad Abu Hussein was shot by Israeli forces on April 13th while he was covering protests along the Gaza border. He is the second journalist to be killed since the Great March of Return protests started a month ago. More than 40 people have been killed by Israeli forces since then. The political crisis in Armenia has deepened after a talk between the opposition and the government failed. Tens of thousands of anti-government protesters returned to the streets in the capital city of Yerevan. The demonstrators are calling for an early election. Armenians have been protesting for the last 2 weeks against misuse of power by the president for a decade, Sir Sargsyan.
A 6-month cleanup of Boracay, one of Philippines' most popular island resorts, has begun. The government plans to spend $10 million to widen roads, improve drainage, and remove illegal buildings. The 10-square-kilometer island has been heavily polluted due to decades of mass tourism. In February, President Rodrigo Duterte called the holiday destination a cesspit and ordered the improvements. The beach will be officially closed to tourists until the work is complete. And finally, in Trinidad and Tobago, some Good Samaritans came to the rescue of a leatherback turtle on the country's southwest coast. This video, posted to social media, shows villagers in Cedros using rope and good old elbow grease to help the turtle back into the water. They believe it came up ashore to lay eggs, but the tide went down before she got a chance to return to the sea. Nesting season for these creatures lasts until August 31st. And we've come to the end of this news brief, but for these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at talisyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Talis Your English, I'm Sunny Gray. Thank you so much for watching.